Bullies attempt to exclude the new girl from group projects. Wrong target. She was a ninja warrior. Sakura Nightingale pulled her oversized hoodie tighter around her small frame as she navigated the crowded hallways of Riverside High School. At 17, she stood barely 5 feet tall, with straight black hair that fell like a curtain around her pale face, effectively hiding her dark eyes from the world. Her slight build and naturally quiet demeanor made her practically invisible to most students, which was exactly how she preferred it. What nobody knew was that beneath her unassuming exterior lay years of rigorous ninja training passed down through generations of her family. 3 weeks had passed since her father's job transfer had forced them to move from their quiet mountain town to this bustling suburban school. 3 weeks of eating lunch alone, walking through corridors with her head down, and desperately hoping to blend into the background. The other students barely acknowledged her existence, treating her like a ghost drifting through their world. That changed when Madison Cross noticed her. Madison ruled the junior class with an iron fist wrapped in designer clothes and perfect makeup. Tall, blonde, and ruthlessly popular, she commanded attention wherever she went. Her 2 loyal followers, Jessica Park and Chloe Williams, flanked her like bodyguards, ready to execute whatever cruel scheme Madison devised. They had perfected the art of social warfare, using exclusion and humiliation as their weapons of choice. "Look what we have here," Madison announced loudly as Sakura entered AP history class that Tuesday morning. "The little ghost girl actually showed up today." Jessica snickered while Chloe examined her manicured nails with exaggerated boredom. Other students glanced up from their phones, sensing drama in the air, like sharks detecting blood in water. Sakura kept her eyes fixed on her desk, her breathing steady despite the familiar knot forming in her stomach. "Just ignore them. They'll get bored and move on to someone else." But Madison wasn't finished. She strutted over to Sakura's desk, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum floor like a countdown to execution. "I heard you don't have a group for the Revolutionary War project yet. That's so sad." The assignment required teams of 4 students to create a presentation on a major battle from the American Revolution. Groups had formed naturally over the past week, leaving Sakura to work alone until someone took pity on her or the teacher forced an arrangement. "Maybe if you tried talking to people instead of hiding in that ratty hoodie, someone might actually want to work with you," Jessica added, earning approving nods from her friends. Sakura's jaw tightened slightly, but she remained silent. Back home, her grandfather had taught her that true strength came from restraint, not reaction. "A ninja strikes only when necessary, little blossom. Your enemies will reveal their weaknesses if you wait and watch." Mr. Peterson entered the classroom, ending the immediate torment, but not Madison's newfound interest in making Sakura's life miserable. Throughout the week, the pattern established itself with ruthless efficiency. In the cafeteria, Madison would loudly announce to nearby tables, "Don't sit there, that's where the weird girl usually lurks." Students would scatter from empty seats around Sakura like she carried some contagious disease. During gym class, Madison made sure Sakura was always picked last for teams, then complained loudly about being stuck with dead weight whenever they ended up together. "She probably doesn't even speak English properly," Chloe whispered just loud enough for Sakura to hear as they changed in the locker room. "I bet she's here illegally or something." The comments stung, but Sakura endured them with the same stoic patience she'd learned during countless hours of meditation in her grandfather's dojo. She had survived much worse during her training, hanging upside down from trees for hours, walking across hot coals, sparring with opponents twice her size. High school mean girls were nothing compared to dodging real shuriken in the dead of night. Still, the isolation wore on her. She found herself eating lunch in empty classrooms, hiding in the library during breaks, and taking longer routes to avoid Madison's hunting grounds. Every day felt like navigating a minefield of social cruelty. The breaking point came during chemistry class on a Thursday afternoon. Mr. Rodriguez announced a major group project worth 30% of their grade, creating a presentation on chemical reactions that would require extensive research and laboratory work. "Choose your partners wisely," he warned. "This project will make or break your semester grade." Sakura looked around hopefully as students immediately began forming groups. She spotted 3 classmates who seemed kind enough, quiet kids like herself, who might welcome an extra member. But before she could approach them, Madison appeared like a vulture circling carrion. "Oh, Emily, Sarah, Mike," Madison called out sweetly to Sakura's potential teammates. "I heard you need a 4th person for your group. What a coincidence. So do we." She gestured to Jessica and Chloe, who flanked her with matching smirks. Emily, a shy girl with thick glasses, glanced nervously between Madison and Sakura. "Actually, we were thinking of asking—" "That's so sweet of you to consider charity cases," Madison interrupted, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But you really don't want to tank your grades for someone who probably can't even pronounce combustion correctly. Trust me, I'm doing you a favor." Sarah bit her lip uncertainly, while Mike avoided eye contact entirely. The social pressure was too much. One by one, they nodded their acceptance of Madison's group, leaving Sakura standing alone as other students paired off around her. "I guess some people are just meant to work alone," Madison announced loud enough for the entire class to hear. "It's probably better that way. Teamwork requires actual communication skills." Laughter rippled through the classroom as Sakura felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. She stared at her desk, fighting back tears that threatened to betray her carefully maintained composure. "This isn't training," she reminded herself. "These aren't practice opponents. They're just scared children lashing out at what they don't understand." But understanding their motivations didn't make the isolation any less painful. That evening, Sakura sat in her bedroom staring at the chemistry textbook, trying to figure out how she could possibly complete a 4-person project by herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandfather back home. "How goes your greatest challenge, little blossom?" She typed back, "Still learning to blend in, grandfather. Sometimes the shadows are not where we belong. Sometimes we must step into the light and show the world who we truly are." Sakura stared at the message for a long time, remembering summers spent training in the mountains, learning to move like smoke and strike like lightning. Her grandfather had prepared her for many things, but not for this particular kind of warfare. The next morning brought fresh humiliation. Madison had apparently spent the evening orchestrating her next campaign. As Sakura entered the hallway, she found students staring at their phones and whispering. A few pointed in her direction before quickly looking away. "Did you see what Madison posted?" she heard someone whisper. Sakura didn't have social media accounts, but she didn't need to see the post to understand its impact. The sideways glances and barely contained snickers told the story clearly enough. Madison had weaponized the internet against her. In English class, Mrs. Henderson announced another group project, this time for their Shakespeare unit. "I want you to perform scenes from Romeo and Juliet, groups of 4, and I expect Oscar-worthy performances." The familiar dance began again. Students clustered together, forming their alliances while Sakura sat alone, watching the social battlefield from the sidelines. But this time something felt different. A quiet anger had begun building in her chest, like a slowly gathering storm. "Looks like our little ghost needs a group again," Madison announced, her voice carrying across the classroom. "It's so hard being invisible, isn't it? Maybe if you actually participated in school life instead of hiding all the time, people might notice you exist." "I notice she exists," called out Tyler Mitchell from the back of the room. "Hard to miss someone who looks like she just crawled out of a horror movie." The laughter that followed felt like physical blows. Each chuckle another weight added to the growing pressure in Sakura's chest. She closed her eyes, feeling her grandfather's training kick in automatically. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate steadied, and the familiar calm of combat preparation settled over her like a familiar cloak. Not yet, she told herself. Wait for the right moment. Let them show their true nature. But Madison wasn't finished. Emboldened by the laughter, she decided to push further. You know what? I bet she doesn't even understand Shakespeare. Probably thinks Romeo and Juliet is some kind of sushi restaurant. More laughter. Chloe added, maybe she can just bow and say, so sorry for her entire performance. That's enough, Mrs. Henderson said firmly, but the damage was done. The words hung in the air like poison, infecting everyone who heard them. Sakura opened her eyes, and for just a moment, something flickered in their depths. Something cold and dangerous that made the boy sitting next to her unconsciously scoot his chair away. The weekend provided temporary respite, but Monday brought a new level of persecution. Madison had clearly decided that half measures weren't sufficient. She wanted total social annihilation. The attack came during lunch period. Sakura sat alone at her usual table in the far corner of the cafeteria, trying to work on her chemistry project while eating a sandwich her mother had packed. She'd found a way to complete the assignment solo by focusing on simple reactions that didn't require extensive equipment, though she knew her grade would suffer compared to the elaborate presentations the groups would deliver. Madison approached with her entire entourage, not just Jessica and Chloe, but several other girls she'd recruited for maximum humiliation. They surrounded Sakura's table like a pack of wolves, circling wounded prey. Well, well, Madison announced loudly enough to attract attention from nearby tables. Look what we have here. Little Miss Mysterious working all alone. How sad. Sakura continued eating, not acknowledging their presence. This only seemed to infuriate Madison further. You know what I think? Madison continued, her voice rising. I think you're just a weird little freak who doesn't belong here. Nobody wants to work with you because you're gross and creepy and probably dangerous. Several students had turned to watch the confrontation now, their conversations dying as they sensed something bigger brewing. Sakura could feel their eyes on her, waiting to see how she would react. Maybe you should just transfer to some other school where they appreciate antisocial loners, Jessica added helpfully. Chloe picked up Sakura's chemistry textbook and held it aloft. Look at this. She's actually trying to do a 4-person project by herself. That's so pathetic, it's almost funny. Give it back, Sakura said quietly, speaking for the first time. The simple words seemed to shock Madison more than if Sakura had screamed. Oh, so you can talk. I was starting to think you were mute along with everything else wrong with you. I said give it back. Sakura's voice remained steady, but something in her tone made several students at nearby tables unconsciously lean away. Madison tossed the textbook onto the floor, where it landed with a loud thud that echoed through the increasingly quiet cafeteria. Oops, Butterfingers. Sakura stood slowly, her movements fluid and controlled in a way that seemed almost unnatural. She walked around the table toward her textbook, but Madison stepped into her path. Where do you think you're going, freak? I'm not done talking to you yet. That's when Madison made her fatal mistake. As Sakura bent to retrieve her book, Madison shoved her hard between the shoulder blades, sending her stumbling forward. The textbook skittered across the floor while Sakura caught herself on her hands and knees. The cafeteria fell completely silent. Sakura remained on the ground for several heartbeats, her head down, black hair falling around her face like a curtain. When she finally looked up, something had fundamentally changed. Her dark eyes held a stillness that seemed to suck the warmth from the air around her. That, she said quietly, was a mistake. She rose to her feet in one fluid motion that defied normal physics, her body moving with the liquid grace of a predator. Madison took an unconscious step backward, suddenly aware that she might have awakened something she didn't understand. "What did you just say to me?" Madison demanded, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Sakura didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying Madison with the detached interest of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet authority that made everyone in the cafeteria strain to hear. "For 3 weeks, I have endured your petty cruelties with patience. I have allowed you to believe that silence equals weakness, that restraint means fear. I have given you every opportunity to show basic human decency, and you have failed every test." Madison's face flushed red. "Listen here, you little—" "No." The single word cut through Madison's bluster like a blade through silk. "You listen. You have spent weeks trying to exclude me, to make me invisible, to convince everyone that I don't belong here. You succeed only in revealing your own inadequacy." Several students had pulled out their phones, sensing that something unprecedented was about to happen. The social media generation's instincts for viral content were finely tuned. Madison looked around at her friends for support, but something in Sakura's demeanor had shaken their confidence. Jessica and Chloe exchanged uncertain glances, while the other girls began edging away from the confrontation. "You think you know what I am," Sakura continued, her voice never rising above conversational level, but carrying perfectly through the silent cafeteria. "You see a small, quiet girl and assume she must be weak. You mistake wisdom for timidity, restraint for fear." She took a single step forward, and Madison instinctively stepped back, her body recognizing a threat her mind hadn't yet processed. "Let me show you what you've been picking on." What happened next would be talked about at Riverside High for years to come. Madison swung first, a wild, clumsy slap aimed at Sakura's face. To the watching students, it seemed like Sakura simply wasn't there when the blow arrived. She flowed around Madison's attack like water around a stone, her movement so fluid it seemed almost supernatural. Before Madison could register what had happened, Sakura's hand shot out and grasped her wrist with iron fingers. Madison's face went white as she realized she couldn't break free from what looked like a casual grip. "Violence should always be your last resort," Sakura said calmly, still holding Madison's wrist. "But when someone pushes you to that point, you must be prepared to end the conflict decisively." She released Madison's wrist and stepped back, but the damage was already done. Madison stumbled backward, cradling her hand and staring at Sakura with wide, frightened eyes. "I don't want to hurt you," Sakura continued, her voice carrying a strange kindness now, "but I will not allow you to continue this behavior. The choice is yours." Madison's shock transformed into rage. She couldn't accept that her carefully constructed social dominance had been challenged by someone she considered beneath her. "You freak! You think you're some kind of tough girl? I'll show you what happens to weirdos who don't know their place." She lunged forward again, this time with both hands extended, trying to shove Sakura to the ground. It was like trying to tackle smoke. Sakura sidestepped with minimal effort, and Madison's momentum carried her past her target. As Madison stumbled forward, Sakura gently guided her motion, sending her sprawling across the floor in a tangle of limbs and wounded pride. The cafeteria erupted in gasps and whispers. Several students were openly recording now, their phones capturing every moment of Madison's humiliation. "Stay down," Sakura advised quietly. "This doesn't have to continue." But Madison was beyond rational thought now. Years of unchallenged social dominance had never prepared her for actual resistance. She scrambled to her feet, her perfect hair disheveled, her designer clothes wrinkled and dirty. "Jessica! Chloe! Help me!" she screamed at her friends. The two girls looked at each other uncertainly. Something about Sakura's calm confidence had shaken their faith in Madison's invincibility. They had expected the weird new girl to cower and cry, not to move with the fluid grace of a trained fighter. "I wouldn't recommend that," Sakura said, addressing Madison's friends directly. This is between her and me. Don't let her pride drag you into something you'll regret." Her words carried a weight that made both girls take another step backward. There was something in Sakura's tone that suggested consequences far beyond normal high school drama. Madison realized she was truly alone for the first time in her high school career. The realization broke something inside her, and she launched herself at Sakura one final time, fingernails extended like claws, all pretense of dignity abandoned. This time, Sakura didn't simply dodge. She caught Madison's wrists in both hands, spun with balletic grace, and used the bigger girl's momentum to flip her through the air. Madison hit the floor hard, the impact driving the breath from her lungs with an audible gasp. The cafeteria fell into stunned silence. Sakura stood over her fallen tormentor, not breathing hard, not disheveled, looking as calm as if she'd just finished a casual stroll. "I told you that violence should be your last resort," she said quietly. "I also told you that when you reach that point, you must be prepared to end the conflict decisively." Madison lay on the floor, staring up at the ceiling, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. The realization of what had just happened was beginning to sink in, and with it came a fear unlike anything she'd ever experienced. "Who are you?" she whispered. Sakura knelt beside her fallen opponent, her expression softening slightly. "I'm someone who was raised to believe that strength should be used to protect others, not to harm them. Someone who was taught that true power comes from knowing when not to use it." She stood and retrieved her chemistry textbook from where it had fallen earlier. The simple action seemed to break the spell that had held the cafeteria in silence. Conversations exploded around them as students processed what they had just witnessed. "But I'm also someone who will not be pushed beyond her limits," Sakura continued, her voice carrying clearly over the growing chatter, "and you have pushed me beyond mine." Madison struggled to sit up, her face flushed with embarrassment and pain. Around her, she could see students recording everything, their phones capturing her humiliation for posterity. The social media posts would be devastating. "This isn't over," she said weakly, but the words lacked conviction. Sakura tilted her head slightly, studying Madison with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Yes, it is. You're going to leave me alone from now on. You're going to tell your friends to leave me alone, and you're going to stop using your social position to hurt people who can't defend themselves. You can't tell me what to do." "I'm not telling you," Sakura replied calmly. "I'm informing you of how things are going to be. Because if you continue this behavior, I will continue to respond appropriately. And next time, I might not be feeling so merciful." The threat was delivered with such quiet certainty that Madison felt a chill run down her spine. She looked around for support from her friends, but Jessica and Chloe were busy pretending they hadn't been involved in the confrontation. The other students who had gathered to watch were already dispersing, their phones full of content that would reshape the school's social hierarchy within hours. Sakura shouldered her backpack and walked toward the cafeteria exit, her movements as fluid and controlled as ever. As she passed groups of students, conversations died and then immediately resumed at whispered volumes behind her. "Did you see how she moved?" Madison never saw it coming. "Who is that girl? I heard she's some kind of martial arts expert." "No way, that was just martial arts. She moved like she was dancing." Sakura ignored the whispers and speculation. She had crossed a line she had hoped to avoid, but Madison had left her no choice. Her grandfather's training had prepared her for many things, but navigating the social dynamics of American high school remained a challenge. The rest of the day passed in a blur of sideways glances and hurried conversations that stopped whenever she appeared. Teachers who had previously overlooked her seemed to study her with new interest, while students who had ignored her existence now watched her with a mixture of fear and fascination. By the time the final bell rang, the entire school knew about the cafeteria incident. Social media had done its work with ruthless efficiency, spreading videos and commentary across every platform the students used. Madison's humiliation was complete and very public. Sakura found herself walking through the parking lot alone as usual, but the quality of her solitude had changed. She was no longer invisible. She was simply choosing to be alone, and everyone seemed to understand the difference. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandfather. "I sense that your greatest challenge has been met and overcome, little blossom. Are you well?" She typed back, "I am learning that sometimes the shadows must give way to light." "And what have you learned about yourself in this process?" Sakura paused beside her mother's car, considering the question. She thought about the weeks of enduring harassment, the careful restraint she had shown, and the moment when restraint had finally given way to action. "I learned that true strength isn't just about what you can do. It's about choosing when to do it. And you chose wisely." She looked back at the school building, where students were still clustered in groups, their conversations animated with excitement about the day's events. Through the windows, she could see Madison sitting alone at a table, her usual entourage nowhere to be seen. "I chose necessarily." The next morning brought a transformed social landscape. As Sakura walked through the hallways, students stepped aside respectfully rather than ignoring her. Some nodded politely, others watched her with undisguised curiosity. The fearful whispers had been replaced by a grudging respect. Madison was notably absent from her usual position, holding court near the main entrance. When Sakura finally spotted her during second period, the former queen of the junior class was sitting alone, looking diminished and uncertain. The real test came during chemistry class. Mr. Rodriguez announced that he was reshuffling the group assignments based on recent developments, a diplomatic way of acknowledging that the social dynamics had shifted dramatically. "Miss Nightingale," he said, looking at Sakura with new interest, "I believe you'll find several students interested in working with you now." And indeed, hands went up around the classroom. Emily, Sarah, and Mike, the same students who had been afraid to partner with her before, were now eager to join her group. But more surprising were the other students who showed interest, kids who had never spoken to her, but who now seemed to recognize her value. Sakura chose her partners carefully, selecting students who seemed genuinely interested in the work, rather than just wanting to align themselves with her newfound reputation. She ended up with a group of 3 quiet, intelligent students who had been overlooked by the popular crowd, the same way she had been. "I think we're going to create something extraordinary," she told her new teammates during their first meeting. "When people underestimate you, it gives you the freedom to exceed their expectations." As the weeks passed, the incident in the cafeteria became legendary. Madison's reign of social terror was over, but more importantly, the entire culture of the school began to shift. Other students who had been victims of bullying found their voices, inspired by Sakura's example. The casual cruelty that had once seemed normal was now questioned and challenged. Madison herself underwent the most dramatic transformation. Stripped of her social power and forced to confront the reality of her behavior, she began to show signs of genuine remorse. She stopped the public humiliation campaigns, disbanded her mean girl entourage, and retreated into a quieter version of herself. 3 weeks after the confrontation, she approached Sakura's lunch table hesitantly. Sakura looked up from her chemistry notes, unsurprised by the visit. "Can I sit?" Madison asked quietly. Sakura gestured to an empty chair. Madison sat down carefully, as if afraid sudden movements might provoke another demonstration of Sakura's abilities. "I wanted to apologize," Madison said finally, "for everything. The way I treated you, the things I said, it was wrong." Sakura studied her former tormentor's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. She found only exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine regret. "What changed your mind?" Sakura asked. Madison was quiet for a long moment. "When you flipped me in the cafeteria, it wasn't just physically. You flipped my whole world upside down. I realized that everything I thought I knew about power and respect was backwards." She looked around the cafeteria, where students were engaged in normal conversations, no longer divided into rigid social hierarchies. "I used fear to control people, and I thought that made me strong. But you controlled yourself, and that was real power." Sakura nodded slowly. "Fear is a poor foundation for respect. It crumbles the moment someone refuses to be afraid." "Will you teach me?" Madison asked suddenly. "Not the fighting stuff. I mean the other thing. How to be strong without hurting people." The request surprised Sakura, but she recognized the sincerity behind it. "Strength begins with understanding yourself," she said. "Why did you feel the need to hurt others?" Madison's face crumpled slightly. "Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I wasn't the strongest, the meanest, the most popular, then I'd be nobody. I'd be invisible, like me," Sakura finished. "Yeah, but you were never nobody. You were just waiting for the right moment to show everyone who you really were." Sakura smiled, the first genuinely warm smile she had shown since arriving at Riverside High. "I wasn't waiting to show them who I was. I was learning who I wanted to become." The conversation marked the beginning of an unlikely friendship. Madison's transformation wasn't instant or complete. Years of toxic behavior couldn't be undone overnight. But with Sakura's patient guidance, she began to understand the difference between leadership and intimidation, between confidence and cruelty. The school's social ecosystem rebalanced itself around new principles. Students who had been marginalized found themselves valued for their unique perspectives. The culture of exclusion that had defined group projects and social interactions gave way to a more inclusive environment where differences were celebrated rather than mocked. Sakura's chemistry group ended up winning the science fair with their innovative presentation on chemical reactions in traditional Japanese fireworks, a topic that allowed her to share her cultural background while demonstrating her scientific knowledge. The project was a perfect metaphor for her journey, beautiful, complex, and impossible to ignore once ignited. On the last day of the semester, Sakura stood in the hallway watching her classmates clean out their lockers and exchange summer plans. The same corridors that had once felt like a gauntlet of social warfare now felt like home. Her phone buzzed with a message from her grandfather. "I heard from your mother that you have made many friends. I am proud of you, little blossom." She typed back, "I learned something important, grandfather. A ninja's greatest victory isn't defeating an enemy, it's turning an enemy into an ally." "And what of the skills I taught you? Do they serve you well in this new battlefield?" Sakura looked around at her classmates. Former